chapter 4, which we've all read already, so we've kind of got an overview and idea of what we'll be talking about. But I kind of combined active teaching strategy, active learning strategy, and put it together because I always think of teaching, learning as a continuum. And you know, when you teach, you learn. And you learn even more in the process of teaching. Know one, see one, do one is a concept. So to get started, if everybody would just stand up and pair up in twos, and we're just going to try a little quick exercise to get started that we'll go over a little bit more in detail later. It's just a little 30-second exercise. It's not going to take not even a minute. So,
from the discussions, in there.
Okay. So what I want everybody to do is just turn and face each other, completely face each other, and if you would just about 16, 18 inches apart. Put your hands up, palms just gently touching. And for about 30 seconds, I want you to look into each other's eyes.
This is difficult.
You can do it.
I'm learning something.
This is difficult to come sorry bad at it.
30 seconds.
Sorry. Okay, I feel like it's been 30 seconds.
Okay. Now everybody will give me your attention for just a minute. I'm going to just throw out some simple statistics about that. The government threw a lot of money into some research back in the mid-'80s, which was publicized in the early 90s. It took them about 6 years to complete. It was a massive study. And in this study, they figured out that during an eye gaze, and this was a 30-second eye gaze here. People walking down the street in New York City, the crowded subway, where there's a lot of people, just an eye gaze, an instant, that long eye gaze. 20% peak in creative intelligence at pass, just an eye gaze. So we'll go over this. Everybody can have a seat and relax.
Thank you.
Okay, Brookfield. Passion, hope, fear, exhilaration, weariness, colleagueship, loneliness, glorious defeat, hollow victories, and above all, the certainties of surprise and ambiguity. How on earth can a single word or phrase begin to capture the multi-layered complexity of what it feels like to teach? And I think everybody in this room has that feeling, that passion, that love for teaching, whether it's in the home with your children, or at school, or tutoring, or spending time with a friend, teaching, learning together. It's we're all here. We've got that fever, that love for teaching. And I love that quote from Brookfield. It's the very first sentence of his book, in fact, and it's very heart-touching. So we're going to do a real quick pre-test here. Just very simply, show of hands. How many of you already know a considerable amount about the concept of active teaching, learning strategy? And again, this is a combination. Teaching strategy, learning strategy together, individually. Just how many of you are fairly familiar with it, have used it, or spent a little bit of time being aware of it? How many of you would like to learn more about it? Have you phrased the concept? Okay. What is an active teaching learning strategy? According to Fink, a specific combination of learning activities in a particular sequence. A teaching technique is an explicit teaching activity. Lecturing, leading a class discussion, laboratory work, assigning essays, teaching techniques. And these are techniques that in teaching are used every day. But according to Fink, a teaching strategy is a combination of these particular sequence, and we'll get into that a little bit more as we go along. The value of an active teaching learning strategy, it allows you to arrange techniques as individual learning activities into an effective teaching learning strategy and build it into a paradigm to where, individually each of these activities serve a purpose and boost learning. But when you combine them in a strategy that's been thought out, a strategic order to accomplish specific end games or end goals, then they become even, more effective in building a pyramid, so to speak, of, stacking them up and getting to the top by active combination of different techniques. To be clearly effective, the learner, instructional colleagues in this case, must develop an understanding of an active teaching learning strategy. That's our presentation objective here, so we're going to work towards that as an end goal in mind. Participatory learning, active process, thinking about, this is what I want you to do for a minute here. Just think about active teaching learning for about 30 seconds. If you want to close your eyes or just relax and just, completely relax into it. If you'll just think about your mind processes about the subject itself. Okay, and according to psychology, this process is known as meditative cognition, and again, this helps to boost any learning strategy, and when done regularly, it helps the intelligence level become increased on a regular basis. So, in teaching, if every so often you'll just have your students stop and think about a specific idea, specific concept, specific strategy, and how it's fitting together, and how it's working into their lives personally. Instructional objective, common tasks which instructors are faced, master course content, know the material, that's something that we all want to accomplish, application of course content, how does this apply to the real world, and we're looking at in-class activities and out-of-class activities and how do we divide this up. An in-class activity, lectures, class discussions, in-class writing, small group activities. In relation to small group activities, the old-fashioned way of structuring a classroom used to be, rows and desks, everybody. And what did you see sitting in that environment? The back of the person's head sitting in front of you all day. You change classes, the back of the person's head in front of you. You know what braids look like and ponytails and, feathered hair on the guys and everything like that. But when you put, a group of tables, and you've got 4, desks facing together, or 6 desks, facing together, and every time you look up, what do you see then? Eye contact, eye contact, eye contact. And with every eye contact, 20% spike. If you look at the psychological rhythm patterns of the brain waves that they take, you've got the brain waves going along. Eye gaze, 20% spike. Eye gaze, 20% spike. So if you're sitting here in a group and you're constantly, every time you look up, you've got that creative learning spike. That adds a lot of learning. That adds a lot of learning activity to any classroom. Out-of-class activity, read, do homework, the written homework, make out-of-class observations. So basically what Brookfield is, or what Fink is getting at here is do the research, have the students do the research, the reading, the writing, the kind of things that back in my childhood we used to do in class. Now they're doing that at home, and when you come to class, it's group activity, students working together, having the constant eye contact, of discussing, how is this used? What can we do with this? If they're going into law, if they're going into the medical profession, how do doctors, how does this help me as a doctor? How will this help me with a case study? How will this help me as a mathematician to develop, forms or formulas or concepts or different things like that? Of Course content is an out-of-class activity. How to use course content is an in-class activity. Teaching learning strategies revealed. Do you have a question?
Yes, is that kind of like the flipped classroom concept?
Exactly. Yes, it is. Teaching learning strategies revealed. Examples of 3 teaching strategies: team-based learning, problem-based learning, and accelerated learning are the 3 that we're going to focus on. And in team-based learning, the small groups, again, here's the eye contact, the paradigm, the entire concept, to build the concept around it. Small groups, particular science, the sequence of activities, transform groups into teams. Teams, especially younger children that have grown up in the concept of team, group, it is transformed from groups into teams. And a lot of industry and companies, corporations are using team-based learning, team-based, employees working together as a team to accomplish specific end games or learning goals or different things of that nature. And the educational system is starting to develop into following, building concepts going in that direction to supply or to prepare their learners for that working environment. Testing for team-based learning. Testing measures, the old days, when I was a child, everything was memorize, read, go to school, do your homework, go to school, and take a test, and it was quiet, and yes or no answers, or multiple choice, and short essay, and something of that nature. Nowadays, testing can be done orally. Groups can be tested together. They can answer as a group, either written or oral. Oral exams are becoming very popular, both individually and as a group, or a team structured test, which I find an amazing concept. It frees up the environment and gives us a new strategy to work with. It's just it makes it more real to the learning environment. Like I said, the testing orally or face-to-face, and teams are cohesive, members are committed. With time, members are strengthened, the teams are strengthened, and members become much more committed. They learn each other's personalities, and they start to adapt to each other. It's just like a family, a family that grows together, stays together, grows together. A team that works together, strengthens together. It's the same concept. And a lot of times, we're starting younger children and having them progress through the grades together, and try to keep the same teams together as much as possible, and having that completely structured through the educational system through the different ages. Problem-based learning. This is it's based on case studies, and it's related to material that is related to the professional field that's being studied, for example, law field or the medical profession. Small groups discuss sequential questions applied, examples of questions, and you'll notice the questions are build on each other. What systems or topics are involved? What do we already know or not know? How can this information be learned? How can this information help you diagnose a problem? And this is, again, it's that pyramid effect that builds a paradigm with the questions that you're presenting your students, because you want them to learn to think creative on their own, to where they'll learn when they go out into the work environment. They know what questions to ask themselves and their team members to establish the hierarchy of thought that they're to be most effective ultimately. Problem-based key points. Start with realistic case study or problem. Each student analyzes the case. Learning issues are defined. Name information and ideas that are needed. Research additional information needed. Reflective dialogue is included. Consolidate information required. And report to class. I mean, report to the class is an important aspect of it, like we're doing tonight. It gives the students the opportunity to obtain experience in delivering information, where they're not quite as learned as I am. But it just, you know, it makes it more fluid. And when that's at every, you know, a consistent aspect of the learning game, it becomes more just, you know, commonplace and workable. It's just, you know, really comfortable and relaxed in that atmosphere. Accelerated learning strategy. 6 steps to accelerated learning. Motivate your mind. Self-confidence is developed. The point is defined. Information is gathered. Learning styles are used, such as visual, auditory, kinesthetic, or you know, visual, sound, touch, feel. Research is defined, given meaning to facts that are found. Memory is stimulated through association, categorization, and stories. And storytelling, you know, is a great concept to use in, you know, pretty much any field. For example, math, you know, algebras are story-based math problems. The law uses the case studies, medical profession as well. English uses stories, either writing as well as, you know, discussion. So that's a great strategy for memory. Known facts displayed, tell a friend. The more you tell something, it's, you know, just telling is a form of teaching. Being able to explain something, being able to put it into words and pulls everything together and builds concepts. And you know, if children just, you know, talking to their friends about different things they learned or experienced or something like that, that's an active learning process, both in school and out of school, on the playground or in the classroom. Okay, post-test, in order to determine if the objective was reached, just, you know, if you learned anything tonight or thought of any concepts or, you know, learned to bring the concept of teaching, active learning a little bit more full circle, so raise your hand or just think about it and see if you've brought something together. Just a simple note here along the lines of the eye gazing that we started out with to finish up with that same concept. An additional statistic from the same case study that I mentioned earlier that the government had done back in the mid-'80s and reported the findings back in the early '90s. They took, families were really important, well they still are, but at that time the government was trying to establish, you know, how can we bring families together and make families more functional, because at that time divorce statistics were a little bit high. They were a little bit concerned about it, so they did a lot of like research into marital counseling and different things like that, different types of counseling for that type of environment. And one of the things that they learned, or one of the studies that they did was they had a group of married couples that were having some estranged problems. There were problems like, you know, a lot of tension over leaving the socks on the living room floor and different things like that. But what they did was have the couples for 20 minutes a day, the same time every day. The husband and wife would lay down on their side, face each other with that, you know, 16 to 18 inches difference, just lay there in eye gaze for 20 minutes. That's it, 20 minutes a day, same time every day. And after 3 months, the marital problems had subsided, the tension had subsided. After 6 months, the marital problems were completely leveled out. And after a year, the tension was gone completely. So that's how effective, eye gazing can be. So if you take that concept and again apply that to group learning, where we're sitting looking at each other as we're doing our work, that can make a tremendous difference. Thank you. Questions?
In that study, did they have anything like, did it help with, say, critical thinking? I know in relation to students, how can eye gazing help someone's critical thinking process?
Well, the creative learning and the critical thinking are linked together. The creative intelligence, the boost in creative intelligence carries over into the, into other intellectual aspects as well. So it's going to be affected, all aspects of the learning are affected by that to some degree. Yeah.
Well, I guess in the marital aspect, I guess you find out a lot if you really enjoy looking at your spouse or.
Well, actually,
Or not.
Or not.
Yeah, that could go a whole different direction.
yeah. But there's something, the eye gaze, there's, it creates, I mean, there's a release of endorphins. There, brain chemistry is completely affected by that. It's not the same type thing as, looking at a body. There's something, there's the neurological science and quantum physics is what I'm trying to think of. Quantum physics has done a lot of research into the electromagnetic aspect of it. And the electromagnetic field in the brain, the magnetic field in the gazing between two different brains, there's a polarity that starts to balance in that. So that's got a major aspect, or major.
Well, because you can learn a lot of communication through just looking at somebody.
Exactly.
And them looking at you.
Exactly. In fact, back in the early days, if you study back in philosophy, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle, some of the really old, the original philosophers from ancient Greece, they did a lot of, I completely lost my train of thought. They
It'll either come back or it won't. I do it all the time.
is there any, if you'll ask me something else, I can answer it very quickly. I won't go the long way around this time, but anyway.
Well, you can kind of see if someone is happy or shy or, you can almost tell a person's.
Red, yellow, or green card?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can really,
Yeah, you can. I mean,
as a creative basis, you can do that. I mean, you may not be 100% accurate, and that's okay,
I
but.
think that happens almost naturally, whether you're on this side or that side, it's happening. Whether you're as a student or looking at, the instructor or the educator is kind of in the view of the class. And
That's a great
Well, you can see how intense somebody is, or if they're happy, or if you better call a security guard, or, I mean.
Along that same line of thinking, there was another case study done back in the 70s to where there was the first row of students, statistically speaking, generally are the A students, the second row are the B students, the third row are the C students. And eye gazing was not associated at all with that study. They looked at different, possible things that contributed to that. But this morning it occurred to me, the A students are right there eye gazing with the instructor. So, is there's that electromagnetic result going, or effect going on there as well. So,
Yeah, I think there's a Greek philosopher said we are social beings. When we look at each other, we tend to find some way to say something. It's the awkwardness. When you look someone in the eyes, like 20 minutes looking at your spouse.
without saying anything.
Yeah, you probably want to come up with something.
So, yeah.
30 seconds.
Yeah, I felt like I had to say something as soon as we started.
Talk.
You're right.
Okay, y'all take about 5 minutes and fill out the form real quick, and you're next.